name's Kathryn Sturrock and I'm here today at Katy Sue headquarters. I'm going to show you how to work with some of the sugar button moulds. The sugar button moulds are designed by myself and made by Katy Sue, brilliant British manufacturer. They make the most fantastic moulds, but the sugar buttoned ones are the ones we're going to work with today. So we're going to show you the snail. The snail is one of my favourites actually. It's quite a simple little character, but you also get the Toadstools on there as well, so it's very, very adaptable to many different projects, and as I say, great fun to work with. So I'm just going to show you a couple of samples before we get going. So here I've used it in conjunction with the owl mould and the birdhouse mould. You can see the little snail there at the bottom, and I've used the Toadstools as well. So that makes just a nice addition to a little hanging plaque for a welcome sign for a home. Or you could be a little bit more elaborate, and I'm going to bring in a jar that I've made, again using the various different sugar button moulds, and we've got the snail there for you at the front. You can just see him peeking out. So if I show you a little bit closer up, I'll just tip this round. This is just a jar that's been decorated up with various different sugar button moulds, including the owl and the window and the door, and the Katy Sue maple leaf is on there as well. So it's a good example to show you actually, this one. I'm just going to turn it around so you can see some of the other elements as well. It's, again, great fun to work with the moulds and build them up in different ways and mix and match everything. But we are going to show you how to use the snail itself. So I'm just going to pop that little sample down and bring in the mould. And you can see we've got the snail there. We've got two different toadstool tops and we've got two different toadstool stalks. So I'm going to start with those first. Just take those pieces out so that they're dry and ready. And there are two different ways of working with these, and I'm going to show you both. We're going to start first of all just by using a little bit of corn flour into the mould. Just picking a bit up on my brush. This just makes sure that if there's any moisture in the mould at all, that this is going to get rid of that, because the clay will stick if there's moisture in that mould. So if you wash these out at any point, which you can do, you can put them in a dishwasher to clean them, wash them in warm soapy water. You do need to make sure they're nice and dry before working with them. So very, very easy to do. I'm going to start first of all just with the plain hearty clay. This is the white clay straight from the pack. I've allowed it to dry for maybe about 10 minutes. It does depend on the temperature in your room, but I like to feel that it's going a little bit more rubbery. You'll find that it helps take the clay from the mould when you're ready to eject everything out of there. If it's too wet, you may find it sticks a little bit. So you can see we've got the stalks of the toadstool there. So I've just taken some of the clay and I'm just going to push that into the appropriate area of the mould. Anything that's excess you can just remove. So just by pushing with fingertips, you can see that's easy just to eke out of the area there, and then just work with your fingertips again and make sure that that's nicely filled. If you've got too much still, you can just scrape away with a finger or thumb. What you're looking for is a nice even surface on the top. And when you've got that, just use a fingertip to work around the edge, just to give a nice clean line, and then use the lip of the mould just to pull back. You can see how that is coming away from the clay, and the clay is not bending with it. If it was, that would just mean the clay is a little bit too wet, but you can pop that piece out. So I tend to work with all the individual pieces first and then put them together rather than filling the whole mould. So we've done the little stalk, and now I'm going to do the top of the toadstool. So again, just push the clay into there, work it into the mould to make sure it's well pushed down, because you want to pick up all the detail, and then start to remove any excess just by pushing away with the fingertips and scraping. So again, when you think that looks about right, just make sure that's pushed down nice and deeply into the mould, and then use a fingertip around the edge. Now I do usually use a rolling pin over the top of the different designs, especially with the characters where they've got a lot more detail, but for something like the toadstool top and the stalk, you can just use your fingertips, it's not a problem. So again, I'm just going to work around the edge of the mould, and you can see because that's dry enough, it's just lifting out, and you've got that perfect detail of the spots showing on the toadstool top. Now the reason I did the stalks separate to the top is so that you can change the direction the toadstool sits. So you can have the long toadstool top pointing to the left, or you could change it for the other stalk which points the other way. So it's entirely up to you how you build those toadstools up. And it's just simple to attach them. The clay is nice and wet still, so you just push the clay together and that will hold. You don't need to use any glue whatsoever. And as that dries, it will gain some strength as well. So there we've got the toadstools. I'm just going to put those to one side and work with the snail. Now, if you wanted to put some colour into the main part of the snail, if you didn't want to do it as a white snail, think about the main colour. So maybe if you wanted a beigey colour or maybe a pale green, you can do that. So in fact, I am going to do that for you just to show you what I mean. So I'm going to take some of the green hearty clay and I'm going to take the tiniest amount. I just want a really, really small amount. Pop that into the white clay and I'm going to mix. Now, a tip that I can give you is, if you were just wanted to make one snail and you wanted to mix the colour and you don't want to over mix the clay, use some white clay just to push into the mould first. So just to get the basic shape, I'm not going to really spend a lot of time getting this neat. I just want a gauge of how much clay it's going to take. So I can see with what I've pulled from the pack there, that is going to be almost perfect. So if you do that first and then put the colour that you want into that piece and mix it, you know you're not going to waste clay. So I've just added this tiniest bit of green. If I put the two together, you can see the difference in colour. So it's very, very subtle. Now I'm going to roll that into a nice smooth ball because this is the real version that I'm going to do. Put the clay over the top of the design and then start to push down with fingertips. Now you can start more at the top or at the bottom, it's entirely up to you, whichever you're most comfortable with, but do pay particular attention to the antennae where the mould is a little bit finer, and make sure that you get the clay nicely pushed down into that area there. When you think that it looks pretty even, the top edge, you want a nice fill, then I would suggest going over the top with a rolling pin with this one, just to make sure that's pushed down really, really well. You can also see if there's any excess clay that appears there as well, but that looks pretty good. So I'm going to just work with a fingertip now, just pulling in from the edge, just to give that nice clean line. Now this is one of the moulds where if your clay was too wet, you may find a bit of a sticking area where the finer detail is, so where the antennae are. So if you find as you start to flex the mould, rather than it coming away cleanly, as you can see it is there, the clay may bend with the mould. If that's happening, it's just that the clay is a little bit too wet. So take it out, let it air dry just at room temperature for 5 minutes and go again. At the end of the day, it's just a little piece of clay, so you can roll that up and start again. But you can see now we've got that perfect little snail shape. So entirely up to you how you then decorate. I'm going to bring in something that I made earlier, completely different colour, but if I bring in, we've got a dry snail there that's just been done in the white, and we've got one here that I've started to paint. So I'm just going to finish adding some detail to this one. So first of all, what I'm going to do before I get the paint out, and we've got wet paint and I put my hand in it, I'm going to put a little bit of blush on the cheeks. Now this is a trick that I always like to do on any of the characters or the animals. I always put a little bit of pink blush, I'm just using a brush for this, on the cheeks of the character. It just warms the face up a little bit and brings it to life. And I'm just using a blusher. It's a chalk blusher. It's not got mica powder in it. It's a very matte finish. But if you've got any sort of chalks or artist chalks, you can use those as well. If you've got one of those sticks, you can just pick up the colour from the stick or scrape it with a craft knife and pick up the powder that way. Also, things like the cake decorating powders work very well as well. Right, we're going to add in the eye detail next, and then I'm going to go back to finishing painting the shell. So I'm just going to find my little ball tool, and you'll notice there's already some black paint on the end of there. I use this rather than a paintbrush. I'm just going to remove that so you can see. These are actually nail art tools, and you get very, very fine little ball or embossing tools. So you get different sizes in the pack, and this is one of the smaller ones, but I find it's so much easier for control than a paintbrush. With a paintbrush, you've got the bristles that will bend, and if you've got shaky hands, it's a little bit difficult to get in those fine areas. So by using one of these nail art tools, you can just dip into the paint. So you can see there's a little bit of black paint on the end there now. And I'm just going to just dot that into the hollow of each eye. Now alternatively, you could use a black seed bead. If you're going to use a seed bead, I would put that in at the point where the clay is actually wet rather than dry. I'm painting when it's dry, put the seed bead when it's wet. So there we've got our little snail's eye. And then you can bring that to life by adding a highlight. And that's just done by using a little bit of white paint. You want something very, very fine. So just to highlight the eye, we're going to add a little white dot. And my favourite tool for this is a cocktail stick. Just make sure it's one that's got a nice sharp point, not one that's splintered. And I'm just going to dip the point into the paint, and you can see there's a very small amount of paint on there. And then I'm just literally going to put a tiny dot in each eye. And as that dries, it will show up a little bit more. I'm just going to bring in one that I did earlier. You can see how fine those little dots are. You'll notice as well I've put a shine on the snail's nose. We'll come back to that in a second. So to finish painting, I've already started one of the dry ones there. I've just got a dark green, but you could use any colour that you like. So I'm just going to give a second coat. The reason I've put a coat on first is just to get that base coat on there. You'll find that if you're using an acrylic paint, which is best for the clay, because the clay is very porous, you will probably need 2 coats. So you can see it's a little bit streaky. So I'm just going to pick up some paint on the brush and give it another coat. Now if you look at a snail shell, quite often you'll see it's not a flat colour. It's got some of the colours in there, a bit of a swirly pattern maybe. So as I'm painting the green paint on, I'm actually going to pick up a little bit of white as well. Just get the tiniest bit. I'm going to put a couple of little blobs of white, and I'm just going to clean off my brush just so there's not too much paint on there. I'm just going to start to blend that in, just so you've not got that flat solid colour. And as that dries, you will notice that more. If you've overloaded with the white, you can just go back in with some more green. And as this dries, you will start to see sort of a swirly pattern appear. But I would definitely say go with 2 coats of paint. So if I bring back in the one that's totally dried, you can see that I've done that, and then I've also added a couple of little white highlights to the shell again on top. So we've got a bit of a swirly effect going on with the paint itself, and then the highlighted pieces. Also on the top of the antennae, and also the little tip of the nose. And don't forget that blusher. We did show you how to do that, but it does really warm up the features of the face. So there we've got our little snail that's a painted version, and now I'm going to move on to the version where we can build up the colours with the clay itself. Right, I'm going to bring back my mould. Now we'd already mixed some of the pale green. I've got a little bit left, so I'm just going to mix some more white with that, so it's going to give a much lighter shade again. It's almost white, but it's just got a tinge of colour. Probably need a little bit more than that. And I'm going to stick with the green theme just for the purpose of the demo. We'll maybe go a little bit brighter. I've got some of the bright green from the Hearty range here, so you can see. There we are, we've just got a small amount from the pack. Again, this has been drying, so I'd prefer not to take it straight from the pack. I just found it a little bit too wet. And I've just pulled a small amount of clay off there, just a tiny ball, because it is worth, if you can, trying to put the nose in first. If you can't do this, if you find it's a little bit tricky, then you can paint that on easily afterwards. So I'm just using a cocktail stick just to put that into position and pressing down. Again, you can use a ball tool or a Dresden tool for this, but the trick is not to overfill the area, so you can just see the little nose has been filled with the green there. If you overfill when you put the colours on top, you may find a little bit of bleeding of colours together where they cross over. Now I find the next step is probably the shell is the easiest, and we're going to give it that swirly effect just by using some white clay and some green. I'm just going to roll out the green, roll out a bit of the white, and I'm just going to twist those together, fold in half and twist again, and I'm just going to keep doing that stretch and twist just so we get a little bit of a marbled effect. Now the more you do this, the more solid the colour will start to look. So it's up to you where you stop. I don't want it to be too stripy, but I don't want it to be too solid either. So I think probably what I've got there will work quite well. So taking some of that clay, and I'm going to go steady with this. I'm not going to put the whole lot in straight away. Find an area of the clay that I like the look of. And I'm just going to push that into the shell area of the mould. So again, using a tool if you want to. You can actually do this quite easily with fingertips, but just make sure that that colour there is nicely within the area of the shell and not the rest of the snail. And then we're ready to go over with the main colour. You could take it a little bit further if you like as well. You want to use some of that green on the antennae, maybe just on the ends. Just take 2 balls of clay. They only need to be very, very small. And you could pop those in just at the top of the antenna there. And then we'll go with the main colour on top. Now, because I've got the different colours in, I don't want to disturb what I've done. So I'm going to be a little bit more careful with building this up. So rather than going with a lump of clay straight over the top and pushing it around, I'm going to take a piece and fill the head in first. And that's going to hold down the colour in the nose. And also if I push that into the antenna, that's going to mean those green bits aren't going to come out of place as well. So you can add the clay separately. You don't have to go in with one great big piece. You can build it up as long as you fill the mould enough so that the clay pushes down and picks up all the detail. That's all you want to look for. Now, because the shell's in first, we can now go over the top with the main colour. It doesn't matter that I'm hiding some of that. The detail is in the base of the mould, and as long as we've got the colours in the right order there, then you're fine. So you want to fill that up until you feel that you've got a nice even fill. So I'm just going to top that up a little bit further. And again, I would suggest using a rolling pin on the snail just to push that clay right down. Make sure it's picking up every bit of detail, and that's nicely filled. And as usual, I'm going to go around the edge with a fingertip and just pull in the clay from the edge, just to give us that nice clean outline. Start to flex. Again, use the lip of the mould and just keep working round. You can see how that's coming away. One good tip for you is don't put your finger, if you can, directly under the head of the snail, because if you're pushing with a fingertip from underneath, you may distort his face a little bit. So I'm just being cautious of those antennae. Just going to give a little bit of a helping hand out there, and there we've got our snail. So I'm just going to make sure his nose is stuck down. If it's a little bit off centre, if it's moved slightly, you can easily nudge that into position with your cocktail stick. And there we've got the snail. So we've already shown you how to build up just with one colour clay and then paint the detail. This is taking it a step further by building with the different colours. You can see that marbling effect on the shell looks really good. The cheeks, just add the blush the same, and the eyes are done in exactly the same way as we did the painted version. The exact same method is used for the Toadstools. So again, you can build it with those individual colours, or you can go with the white as we showed you in the demo, just building and then painting the detail. So I've got one here where I've painted that in with the pink, and then it's just a case of painting the spots in. Now, one tip I will give you with the Toadstool is, if you want to build up the separate colours, then you can do the stalks first. You can use a separate colour for the top of the Toadstool, but I wouldn't ever attempt trying to get those dots in individually. I would say always go back and paint those. You'll just find that trying to get each individual spot in with a separate colour is going to be tricky for you. They're not going to sit in the mould very well, so it's always easiest just to paint. But I think what I will do, although I've just painted that one in, I'm just going to show you how you can build up the colours with the separate clays and get this little ruffled piece underneath. So we'll just put that one to one side because that was painted already, and I just wanted to show you the spots. But if we start again with some of the white clay for a stalk, and I've also got some red hearty clay here, which I'm just going to use the tiniest bit again to colour some of the white to make the top of the toadstool. So I usually roll into a nice smooth ball first, and then we can choose one of the stalks. We'll go for the little stalk here, and again just push that in with fingertips. There's not really any need to use a rolling pin with the stalks. You can just push that down. Just clean up the edge. If you do forget to clean the edge up and you get any little wisps of clay and little tatty areas, you can trim those off with scissors anyway, so don't worry too much about that. But it does give a nice clean finish straight away if you just work around with a fingertip. Now for the top of the toadstool, I am just going to mix some of that pink. So I'm using some of the red hearty and just mixing that into the white clay. So it is just like working a full colouring into fondant. Just keep stretching the clay. Of course, if you wanted a red top, you can use the clay straight from the pack. You don't have to go pink. You could have a red top toadstool, which is a little bit probably more traditional. I just wanted to show you how you can easily mix the colours. So we'll choose one of the toadstool's tops. I'm going to go for the smaller one this time. And to start with, I'm just going to push some of that pink clay straight in there. Start with the main colour first. And then using a tool, again a Dresden tool is perfect for this, I'm just going to pull away some of that pink clay because I want to expose the area that looks a little bit more frilly. So I'm just pulling that away so I can see that area there. It's quite tricky, I don't know if the camera's picking it up. I'm just going to tilt that a little bit so the frilly bit is at the base of the mould there. So we'll just get that ready. You can see a line where the top of the toadstool is separate to the frillier area. And then I'm just going to roll out, just with fingertips, some white clay. Of course you could use a beige colour or whatever colour you wanted, but I'm going to go with the white. I'm just going to push that in to the area there. And then we can flatten out the main colour over the top again. Now, if you want to use a rolling pin on that, you can do, but again, fingertips would probably be enough. As usual, I'm just going to neaten off the edge with a fingertip, just pulling it in, and we're just going to flex the mould and take that out. And you can see then you've got the detailed frilly area at the bottom. And then it's just a case of putting the top onto the stalk, and then you can carry on painting the little dots in. Very, very simple, very effective, and these have so many different uses. I'm just going to revisit the samples again for you. So if I bring in the little welcome sign, you can see the snail at the bottom, and he has been done in the pale green. Now I've added some glitter to the shell there, but you can see the little cheeks, the coloured nose, and the eyes are all filled in. So just as a reminder of the two different versions that I've done, we've got the painted version done with the air dry clay, and we also did the version where I built the clay up into different colours and did the swirl effect onto the shell of the snail there. And then the eyes are done in exactly the same way for both versions. Just bring in the second sample, just to remind you again there, just so you can see it in a different colour as well. Let's find a snail. There he is. So a completely different colour, but again the same sort of technique. And I will just let you know that one's been done in polymer clay rather than air dry clay, so the choice of clay is yours. Polymer clay is an oven bake, and of course the air dry does exactly what it says, it dries in the air. It works very, very well with both versions.